So look, I think it's fair to say that new possibilities are opening up like never before. I'm sure people have heard of concepts such as analytics, big data, machine learning, robots. We've got generative AI like Chat GBT. I think really the advances, particularly I would say, I feel in HR, these have been accelerated, exacerbated by COVID as well. I think that's really drew a lot more attention to the need for these things and how that's really evolving, the workplace. So I think all of this is really, I think, coming together and in my view, particularly over the past year or two, off the back of ChatGPT, I think really the speed of which this technology is kind of being introduced into the workplace is quite daunting. And what is people analytics? I think, this is a concept is merged in the past five years or so. This is a bit of a word cloud. Just for the purpose of the presentation, there's many different terms that people use. I like to use the term people analytics, but some refer to this as HR analytics, human capital analytics, workforce analytics. Some are actually should we call it workforce analytics, considering that it's not just about people anymore. Now we're introducing robots and AI into the workplace. So look, there's lots of debates and terms, but I think for all intents purposes, I'll kind of refer to these as essentially the same thing when I talk about people, data, and analytics. And what is people analytics? I think this is a concept is merged in the past five years or so. This is a bit of a word cloud. So for me, how do I describe this? I like to talk about the interfaces between four key domains. So you have the domain of HR. So that obviously this is the domain in which we're applying this. You've got the domain of your kind of IT systems. You've then got your statistics and pure mathematics, and then the science. Now, the interface between HR and systems, that's where you have your HR information reporting systems, or HCM. Interestingly, I think a lot of HR functions have just relabeled these teams as analytics. I don't consider that as analytics. That's your very traditional reactive reporting. You then have the interface between the systems and stats. That's where your computer science comes in. Interface between science and statistics. That's your behavioral economists. And then finally, your kind of org behavior and design is the interface between science and HR. That's where I consider myself. I am a chartered. So the first thing I'd kind of touch on, and look, this, I'm sure many of you may be familiar with this. Many organizations are really still hitting the wall with HR management, and actually just looking at some of the comments in the chat at the beginning, I think people are saying that, really struggling, to get out of the manual nature, the reactive nature of some of the reporting and the data that we have. And essentially what this is showing, although analytics is not a new concept, it is still relatively new in the domain of HR. If you compare it to other areas like, operations, customer services, and marketing and sales, help get past there. Well, this is just another kind of build on or example of what we're talking about. So really, as I said, HR traditionally tends to look at, what has happened in the past. And we react after events have already happened. So I think a good example for me is regrettable turnover. So regrettable turnover is typically, you'd look at your top performers and how many of those have left in the prior year, and that would be your regrettable turnover. My personal view is don't let this inhibit, you really should just kind of focus around, well, at the end of the day, for me, people analytics is around driving action for the business. And really that is the key stakeholder. So really just try and go straight to, well, what are those questions that your business view of most value, and really try and prioritize those around there. And I think use cases and things are quite a good way to kind of go about that. But we'll touch on that a bit more later. The other thing I wanted to kind of draw reference to, and again, is used a lot in technology, and this is kind of Gartner's 2023 hype cycle for HR transformation. And, what they call out is within 5 to 10 years, HR technologists will be an essential enabler of our HR transformation. And I think, look, again, this is a top trend. I see a lot of HR functions. As I've said, HR has traditionally been underinvested in their technology. They have a lot of legacy. tech debt. So really trying to modernize this. I think everyone's moving to more cloud-based systems and technologies. But look, it should come at no shock that, with this ability to automate and improve operations, I think AI is going to be a key transformational factor for the HR. Again, if you've not looked at this, it's definitely worth a look. Again, I think for me, you've got to overlay the technology landscape when you kind of think about this, and an exciting kind of use case. So kind of been working and partnering with Agile HR analytics for this. And they've kind of created a virtual agent for a chief HRO or a senior HR business partner. So this is a real scenario that they've actually built. And I'll kind of just go through this now to kind of bring this to life. And I think what the example is showing that when you're using kind of ChatGPT, the assumption here is that you're using your company license to basically be able to upload kind of, you've got your static internal documents, as well as other internal reporting that you can then go in and start to query, as well as then overlaying and leveraging some of the external environmental factors.
Okay, so if you see my screen, only having very basic data items like the ones that are on the right hand side, which is about 20 data points or so, which is very standard. Every organization that I know, they're capturing some sort of data like that, even if it's in a basic system or even in Excel. So with those, you can answer top questions like, have we been successful in recruiting the necessary talent? Are we good at retaining talents? What is our average employee salary? Is any pay gap between male, female, etc.? So there are so many of those questions that you can answer with just very limited amount of data. And yes, of course, when you want to do some prediction and some of those more advanced analytics use cases, then you will need more data. But it's always a journey that you need to start and you expand. It's not the overnight process that and it's not like an end goal. Like basically you start your journey and you just get more mature and then you take it to next level.
Yeah, and I think exactly to your point, Iman, that I think that's, everyone's at different stages of maturity and, different technology. And I think it's wherever you are on that journey, there are absolutely things that you can do. Again, I would just go back to, it's really focusing on what are those key questions, what's the business strategy, what are those key, what are going to be the key things that they need from their people to deliver and execute on that strategy. And whether you're in government sector or private sector, I think there's going to be naturally a lot of those synergies. The other thing I'd say as well is that, again, I don't know, be interested to hear from the people on the call, but there's often as well, what I've certainly seen in my experience is that there's a bit of resistance to change, and there's often a bit of a blame on, I don't trust the data. So when the data doesn't actually align to maybe people's closely held beliefs, there's a bit of a resistance to, no, the data must be wrong and things. And so good example of that, I always used to work with my chief HR officer and say, well, look, what's your hypothesis? What does your gut say? What is that? Let's turn that into a hypothesis. But for every hypothesis based on the data, there's a null. So let's see what the data is saying. And I remember one where there's a hypothesis that, I think we're paying people more today than we did 10 years ago. And we actually looked at the data, and actually the data was contrary. It was actually the opposite. But there's this perception, and they're going and speaking to people, and they maybe hear from one or two very vocal people, and then they're overgeneralizing to the whole population. So what we're trying to do is take the emotion out of it and have a bit more fact-based, data-driven conversation. But the point is, be prepared if the data is not aligned to what your way of thinking, and you maybe be doing things a certain way your whole career, and the data is contrary to that. That's for me is that, are you going to ignore that? Are you still going to go down your line of inquiry, and you've spent all this money and think, I'm still going to go and implement this, and lo and behold, it's not really having the desired impact. So I think, again, when you're having those conversations, Iman, as you said, let's really focus on the questions. What are the facts? What's the data saying? And yeah, I think but it's what's the action after that? So what are you actually doing? Is there, are we just, oh, that's interesting, and yeah, nothing happens, or actually, yeah, this is what we're going to do about it, and we're going to evaluate actually did that make an impact or not. So I think, again, this is going back to, I think, that Thomas article, is that the fourth wave, it's around the impact that we're driving off the back of these data and insights, right? So yeah, I'll keep hammering that point home.